Welcome to Parapsychology Today, a program of investigation into the realms of the unknown. Suspend your mind for a moment and journey to a world beyond the five senses. Parapsychology Today is a program exploring ideas, theories, and concepts that have been around since ancient times. We'll journey to outer worlds and inner worlds. We'll look into such phenomena as past lives, UFOs, and hauntings. And we'll explore psychic ability as it relates to human potential. We do not intend to prove or persuade, but rather present theories and personal stories of ventures into the world of parapsychology. Whatever your beliefs, we hope this program will start you thinking about a reality beyond the five senses. Welcome to our show. We have a great topic today. We're going to talk about ghosts and hauntings. I have two guests. First, I have Lori McQuarrie. She's a psychic consultant. Lori is also the owner of Management by Intuition, and she has been a guest on several of my shows. I also have, as a second guest, Michael Hosoffel, and he'll forgive me if I have to practice his name a little more. And Michael does paranormal investigations, and I know you're thinking, what is that? And we'll get a little more detailed on what he does actually a little later in the program. Right now, I think what we need is a definition. We're going to be talking about ghosts, and it conjures up all sorts of ideas. Let's ask Lori and Michael. We'll give them a turn to see if they can explain. What is a ghost, Lori?
Well, I probably am not going to give you a scientific term. I think Michael's probably more into that field than I am. To me, it just represents the emanations of someone who has passed on. Can be a spirit who is what we call earthbound, somebody who has not quite made the transition to the other side. I think a lot of it is very tied to electrical energy. It doesn't always have to conjure up a picture of bad things. You know, a lot of times people get the picture of a ghost as something that's terrifying and trying to make someone's life miserable, but that's not always true. I believe a lot of our loved ones try to come back and contact us in that form.
And Michael, can you give us that scientific or expand on that?
I would say I would agree with everything that she said. A lot of the things that people report as ghosts technically actually are not ghosts. We as parapsychologists find kind of three main categories of what the people out there are reporting, and only one of those is an actual entity or a spirit or something left of a living person that we see. Often it's just a shadow or a memory, if you want to call it, of a past event. It's a piece of time that somehow gets recorded into the environment. But there are cases where it does seem that something is left of a personality of someone who lived there that can actually interact and communicate with people.
I don't know if you can explain it, but how can a piece of time get left somewhere?
Well, Lori is an expert on psychometry is one of the terms used. Psychic detectives, they can get information from a physical object, a solid object. And there's really nobody is sure how that happens, but it seems that if the conditions are right, if the emotion is intense enough, if the duration is long enough, and if the receiver is sensitive enough, something about a past event can be, I guess, encoded into the physical environment and then played back like it's a piece of tape, a videotape. And that's probably the most common report. That's sort of the nostalgic view of what a ghost is. You see the knight in armor or the cloaked figure. Everyone sees him walking down the hall, or the soldier, somebody in period costume. It's not a communicating entity. It's just a piece of time that plays itself over and over again, exactly the same.
I know what psychometry is. I'm not sure if everybody does. Can you explain a little bit when Michael...
Psychometry is actually the holding of an object of a person's, can be clothing or jewelry. I also would sort of expand that to buildings where people have actually lived, and I think the energy is just kind of soaked into the atmosphere of the walls. When he was referring to period pieces where people have come back and replayed certain scenarios, I think it also holds true for later events. When I have gone and worked a murder case or missing person cases, I always ask to go to the place where they were found or missing from, and there's an energy that's held there.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. It's hard you know, to even understand it. I suppose if you were more scientific minded, it is kind of a scientific type thing, like with energy and airwaves or something to that effect. Is that correct?
Well, most of the theories that even come close to some kind of a definition deal with quantum physics, and they deal with atoms and electrons, and they touch on elements like the magnetic tape in a video or in a recorder has some similar traits to it, but there's no definition that's a real good textbook answer.
And we'll get into that a little more because Michael actually does use instruments such as camera, and you brought one with you. We'll get into that a little later, and just you can explain how that works. And I think I was reading recently about quantum physics and how it is kind of delving into this realm now. This program's a little later than some of the programs that aired on television during Halloween. It seems that Halloween, everybody was doing something on ghosts and hauntings. Why do people associate spirits with Halloween? Can either one of you provide an answer?
Well, I think it's rather historical. I mean, it was actually considered something along the lines of the Day of the Dead to begin with. It goes back to pagan times. I think we've taken the whole area of psychics, ghosts, paranormal, and really projected it to be far different than it was ever meant to be. That's why I welcome having someone like Mike on here to really give us the perspective of a scientific, which everybody should do, as well as, you know, pay attention to the intuitive side, but you need to have a balance of both.
Do you think movies have given us some kind of a distorted view of what spirits and ghosts are like?
Oh, sure. What was that movie? Ghostbusters?
Ghostbusters.
I mean, it was funny. I enjoyed the movie, but I thought, gee, now we're going to have a whole new run at this, and it's going to be, you know, made fun of all over again.
I've found that movies have raised people's expectations so much as to what is out there, what can be seen, that they end up being let down when they realize that the actual physical side of any of these phenomena are so small and so quiet. The spiritual and internal side is very large and very big, but like you say, there needs to be a balance. I mean, I can only come into play and only use my equipment when there is some kind of a physical manifestation. She would be the expert that would come in when you're talking internal and spiritual,
and
emotional
feelings.
You
Right.
can't record a feeling on a
Right.
on a machine.
Well, Lori and I were talking about, going back to movies, about ghosts the other day, and how it's kind of a Christian view of the afterworld, because in Ghost, the good guy, the white light comes down for him and he goes to heaven, and the bad guys, the little black guys, come up and they take him down. So I guess some of the movies do portray that Christian.
But there's many other cultures that accept spiritual sort of interaction. Native American medicine, for one, is very strongly recognizing of that, which is a religion that I embrace very strongly.
And the Catholic religion, I believe, believes in spirits. In fact, some priests will perform what we call exorcisms.
Very quietly.
Very quietly, right. They're right.
They don't like to talk about it, but
We'll
do.
talk about that later, because I want to get into different kinds of spirits. We mentioned that spirits are parts of people people have died and they remain earthbound. What would be some of the reasons for spirits to remain earthbound?
It seems to be some kind of at least what I feel about it is that it's a conscious or subconscious action on the part of the deceased individual to hold on to something. It's usually a closed-minded individual, will say, or a very possessive individual. Something about the holding on and the refusing to let go and accept what's happening. Somehow, it's almost like if you're waiting for a bus and you miss the bus and it goes on without you, well, you're stuck. You wait for the next one to come along. So they've kind of missed whatever it was they were supposed to train, they were supposed to catch, and now they're just through some kind of a conscious will, they're stuck. Not that that's what they set out to do, but it's the holding and the fear a lot of times that has held them there.
Could your religion hold you back? Like your expectations say, you think that when you die, Jesus is going to come and get you, and if he doesn't come and
you're still waiting for Jesus
still
on
waiting,
the bus.
right?
Yeah, that could
right.
be. Many times people are held to the earth plane also by addictions, If you have a very heavy addiction, say to drugs, alcohol, anything that would really tie you on a physical level to this plane, sometimes it's very difficult to leave. And also, and I think this is very important, that we are now finally entering an age where people are starting to question religion and the afterlife and what their belief system is. And that's why I think the movies have really started picking up on educating people, which in a lot of ways I felt Ghost was an educating kind of movie. And people are needing to understand that there is grief time when someone has gone, but you have to release them also. Many times the person who has gone on feels compelled to stay for that grieving wife, mother, that just will not let go.
So
it's twofold. It can be from both ways.
So we don't know for sure, but you might advise people that, of course, it's hard when you lose a loved one. You have to go through that grieving period. But
well, no one says you shouldn't. That's a healthy, normal thing to do. But people that, grieve on for 20, 25 years or something and they're not making any progress, they're holding the other person back.
Yeah, I was going to say, how can we help these earthbound spirits? Are there things we can do to help them and to send them on to where they, if we believe this, to where they should be?
You start with accepting your own death. When you can accept your own death, then you will accept other people's.
Okay.
That's the easiest part.
Okay. Anything else?
Sometimes it's as easy as telling this individual, because in most cases it is an individual, that they are in fact dead and that there is nothing left for them here, and they have someplace else to go, and it seems to create some kind of an awareness, and that in the same way that their reluctance held them here, their acceptance just it allows them to leave. It's supposed to happen, and if allowed to, it will happen on its own.
And this thing about going to the light, could you explain that? I mean, you hear that all the time.
I haven't had a personal experience with that.
That's right.
I'll accept it. It
Yes.
sounds fine to me. I think it's very interesting, the many fields of thought about what really does happen. And I think it's very interesting. I think that pretty much happens what you expect. I think if you expect the light, that's probably what you'll have.
Okay,
if
what you
expect. A
That's
taxi cab,
okay.
maybe that's what'll happen. But I think that they certainly, whoever they are on the other side, try to meet our expectations to help us make that transition.
We have a wonderful audience here tonight, too, and I'm hoping anybody have any questions, you just raise your hand and we're going to come to you, because I don't want to hog up this show. So you just flag me down. I want you to get it in here right now. Okay, we have one right over here, Deborah. You want to stand up, please?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, and wait till we get the mic to you. Okay.
Okay, you were talking about the other side. I was wondering, do you know how to describe the other side? How do you describe the other side as?
What I would expect to find on the other side?
Good question.
Well, that's a real careful answer I have to give too, because I honestly don't know. I've read several books that I really like the theory that when a person goes over, and I think it depends on how you go. I think if you go very suddenly, very violently, unexpectedly, I can't think of anything more shocking than to wake up dead. So I think probably what happens is that they may even put you in a hospital situation where you are gradually given the word, I've often thought, maybe just sort of in my imagination, would it be funny if you woke up and you were sitting like, in an airport setting and everybody's waiting for the flight. I think there was even a play written on this once, and actually it's the final flight. So it's like getting you prepared at some level. I think when we go to the other side, there's many planes we don't know about, and I think we are here on one learning phase. When you go to the other side, you're going to get a review of your life, and you're going to figure out what you should have done better or different.
I was going to ask you about that. You brought it up, violent death. I always wondered about wars that are so violent and so many people are killed at one time. I mean, it seems to me that wherever they go would be overwhelmed with all these confused people. But of course we can only speculate. We don't really know.
Often in a war situation, the death may be violent, but it's often very sudden, very immediate. The person is not particularly attached to where they are in the first place. They'd rather be somewhere else anyway, and it's usually very quick. I mean, most of the violent deaths that people talk about in regards to spirits would be a murder or an ongoing sort of enough time is involved for you to realize what's happening to you, and that seems to be a major ingredient of it.
We should say too, for our viewing audience and our audience here, that this is all speculation.
Right.
We don't.
Of course.
We don't know. I mean,
but
I
I wanted
anybody
to
here's
raise
been there and
a
back,
point,
have they?
Pauline, that I think that instances like the Vietnam War that raised so much protestation from young people, I always felt that it was people who had died far too quickly in the war before and came back suddenly and just you know, their life was cut out from them very quickly.
I mentioned that large groups dying together. I read somewhere that this particular woman was living in this house, and she didn't know she had died. She kept carrying on her daily duties. It's, like I said, we're just speculating here. Have you ever heard anything like that? Is anybody? That the person didn't know they were dead?
Well,
and just...
that's the basis of a
That
lot of
seems to be the
ghostly
case.
stories is people. I had a house once. It was really interesting. I've had several houses that were haunted. I hate to even use the term.
Well, let's
but
tell some ghost stories now, because we
okay,
have a few good ones
but
coming
I
up.
had I moved into a house, and it was just a rental, and I knew when I moved in there was a little old lady who lived there, and I didn't get any bad feelings. I just figured she occupied the space, and she used to sweep my floor. It was great. Wish she could do all the housework, but there would be little neat piles where it had been swept, and you could tell it had been swept. And I just knew that she was there. It was her space, and she was keeping it tidy for me.
Well, that's another question that leads me to ask you. Are spirits able to move things physically?
Oh,
like,
sure.
Remember that part in Ghost where he couldn't move something, and then the ghost taught him if you got your emotions worked,
yeah.
you could.
Yeah,
I think they can. I have my own theory that things that were done in life by this individual more frequently than others, for some reason, seem to be more easy for them to do. I don't know. It seems that they are as unaware of us, they being the ghost, as we are of them. And every now and then there's a brief little awareness that happens.
Like they're operating on one plane,
Right.
and once in a while, somebody sensitive like the two of you will, and we've got a great story. I mean, we went to this place, and we've got the owners here of this tavern. In fact, I'd like the viewing audience to know, and our audience here, in just about another minute, we're going to see a tape. Lori and Michael and I went to a place called Molly McGuire's. It's out on Northwest 21st. And Lori's going to give us her impressions of what she felt at this place. Michael is also psychic, and he picked up some impressions, but he also used that equipment we were telling you about. So,
As an example about the activities that were common for this individual in life, I've probably spoken with 4 different people over the past month, and every one of them mentioned that their TV set was turned up, that their lights were turned off, turned on. Nothing profound and miraculous. I am on the other side. This is what it's like, as a TV set or the smell of cigar smoke or a footstep.
But a lot of times electrical energy is tied into the activity.
we've got 2 places that we visited. One was the John Palmer House. That's very well known, but not as well known as Molly McGuire's. We'll see the John Palmer House first, and it'll be coming up on the monitor so everybody can see it. The John Palmer House in North Portland has an interesting history and also, as some claim, an unusual guest. A ghost they call Lotta. Built in 1890 by builder-contractor John Palmer, the house became the Multnomah Conservatory of Music sometime after Lotta and Oscar Hawk purchased it in 1907. A relative of the Hawks inherited the house in 1952 and sold it in 1968 to Mary and Richard Sauter, the present owners. Mary says the ghost, who they believe may be the previous owner, Lotta, appeared in the front parlor soon after the family moved into the house, and she is still letting people know she's around. Mary says they hear her walking in the halls and kitchens, locked doors open and close, among other things. Since turning the house into a bed and breakfast 8 years ago, some guests have also felt Lotta's presence. One guest even provided an interesting piece of information.
She came in the morning and she said, you have a 3rd floor? And I said, yes. And she said, well, what's up there? And I said, well, it's just an attic space, really. And she said, well, you have a woman living up there. And I said, oh, that's nice. You know, we've been here for 20-some years and we haven't been charging her rent. And so she said, yeah, she said, and she's red-headed and she's surrounded by trunks of theatrical clothing. And she asked me if that meant anything. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I understand that Lotta Hope, who we have always felt to be a presence here, was the redhead.
Mary says Lotta can be cooperative when she wants to, and she thinks that all Lotta wants is the house to be taken care of. She doesn't mind Lotta hanging around. In fact, Mary says she's become part of the family. Probably not as well known as the John Palmer House, Molly McGuire's on Northwest 21st is also said to be haunted. Proprietor Ray Morgan says there's nothing he can really put his finger on, but people are talking about the place. His one experience, he says, was hearing what he thought was a woman laughing, but he adds he can't be sure that's what it really was. However, he says others have heard her laughing. Catherine Morgan, owner of Molly Maguire's, says she sometimes hears her name being called, and when she looks, no one is there. It usually happens at night, and she says it can happen just about any place in the tavern. Other incidents reported by some employees and patrons include things disappearing, hearing a door squeak and slam, stomping on the floor, cans rattling, and someone even claims to have been pinched. Molly Maguire's has a colorful history. Built in about 1906, it was a restaurant and hotel for railroad employees. There were 22 rooms on the top 2 floors. Molly Maguire's was a house of prostitution for a while. Old-time patrons believe there's even more to the tavern's interesting past. They believe that the boarded-up wall down in the basement is actually the remains of a tunnel that was used to Shanghai men. You can still see the steel plate over the tunnel that goes under the street. Ray doesn't seem to mind the ghost, and neither does his wife, Catherine. She calls it Molly. She says she and the customers feel the tavern has a warm feeling in spite of the talk of the ghost, strange happenings, and the Shanghai tunnel. Ray and I want to say Molly, but Catherine are here with us tonight, and I want to ask them if anything has happened. Lori and Michael and I were there Monday, and what is it? Today's well, anyway, it's a few days later, and I want to ask them if anything has happened recently. Has she been calling you, Catherine? You want to stand up and? Okay, tell us firsthand what's happened to you.
Well, I've just heard my name called, and I look around and nobody's there. I haven't had a lot of experiences, but I feel it's a happy place and a happy ghost. And I understand there's more than one, since Lori and Mike have been there, that there's possibly 3. And I think it's really exciting.
It is exciting. We're going to ask thank you. We're going to ask Lori and Michael. Well, we're going to talk about it because we were all there together. Lori, do you want to start? Give us your first impressions, what you felt when we went there.
You started in the bar eating area, and I didn't feel a whole lot there. I didn't feel like there was a lot of, or at least any kind of unhappy kind of energy.
And that's the part where
and this is
Catherine
where she's had her name called. I certainly have come to find in any other places that I've gone to that ghosts can be very territorial about different parts of a house or a dwelling. So we went downstairs. That's where I wanted to go, first of all, into the basement. Very creepy area. Went down. Well, it's old. I don't mean to imply that the building is bad, but it's just old and it's just...
Oh, it's pretty creepy.
It's creepy. But we went down, and Mike was with me, and you were there, and we went. I felt very drawn to the left-hand corner of the basement area. It was interesting because later we confirmed that with a waitress who worked upstairs, and she said that she had had an encounter with knocking down there in that particular area when she went into the walk-in refrigerator area. So the downstairs area, the very bottom, was very, very heavy in one sense. The rest of it wasn't too bad.
When you say heavy, what do you mean by heavy?
It's a feeling I get right here in my chest. It's like a heaviness, almost like a negativity. And the picture I got was a man. I could almost see him as sort of the Paul Bunyan type, kind of with suspenders and kind of that macho kind of look. And Michael told me that he thought, before I got there, that this gentleman had blonde hair. And I agreed. I thought they were light-colored hair and a light-colored beard. And certainly somebody who felt that it was his place, that maybe he was somebody who helped run it at some point.
And Michael, you were there, got there just a little bit before we did. And what did you actually tell Lori about what you felt down there?
I didn't tell her a lot initially. About what I felt, except, like she was saying, the blonde hair and the size. What I did when I first got there was go around with this meter.
Well, why don't you go ahead and hold it into the camera?
It's
the way we practiced.
An electromagnetic field meter, and it's obviously not designed with ghost hunting in mind. I don't think anything is that's
yeah, just hold that still.
Reputable, but. What it's designed for is to test microwave ovens, computers, any kind of electric devices that you spend a lot of time around and you're worried about too much of an electromagnetic field coming off of it. Doctors feel that it may have some effect on the cells. But I guess probably by accident, parapsychologists have found that on rare occasions it will actually record a higher than expected reading in an area where there is no obvious source, no even unobvious source of electromagnetic radiation, and that's what happened with us at the store. And what I did was initially establish the obvious sources and some of the hidden sources of this radiation, and then step back because these fields drop off from a.
When you say the obvious sources, can you explain that?
They're video games, video poker, the.
And what happened when you got close to those?
When you go close, the needle it just registers quite a bit higher than the background radiation. It actually goes to the far end. But that falls as you step maybe 5 feet away. Computer screens.
It didn't move either, did it? It stayed in one position?
No, it's very steady. Sometimes it'll pulse, but even the pulsing is a steady rhythmic pulse. And then you back away to within 5 to 10 feet of any obvious source and get a background radiation reading, because there's always a little bit of background radiation. So that's what I was doing when you arrived, was sort of mapping out the place and the sources of these sort of things.
Now, something happened when we went upstairs. Let you tell it, where you were picking up impressions, and then Michael went over and checked it with the meter.
Well, first, when we went to the second floor, there was a very strong feeling in several areas, and there was an area in the front part of the building that was a rather large room space. And he had been walking through and holding the meter. There was nothing electrical on the second and third floors. Everything has been ripped out or disconnected. And when we stood in this one particular area that I felt very strongly about, why there was a lot of reading on the meter. And then when we went up to the third floor, why, of course, I felt that there had been a lot of violent kind of happenings on the second floor. Someone had been hanged. My goodness, I suppose with transients walking in and out of a railroad kind of establishment, you're bound to have something like that. And on the third floor, that was really interesting because there was a bathroom, or what was left of a bathroom, that he went into directly. Even the rest of us were kind of wandering around, and he got the highest reading ever in just a ceramic type setting. And I got a lot of strong feelings at that point.
Now, the high meaning high for a background radiation, it wasn't as high as the front end of a computer screen, but it was double, I would say, double of what the background radiation was downstairs in the midst of all of this electric equipment. So it was considerably higher, being even farther from the source. And again, these fields from a known source, they drop off within a few feet, and we were several feet. We were on the third floor of a gutted apartment building. So.
You use we didn't take any other equipment there that day, but you do use other equipment, right? What kind of things do you use?
Well, you can use other equipment. Again, there has to be a physical manifestation for people like me to have any fun. But if you have enough time, you could set up tape recorders. Tape recorder is probably the most common. This isn't as common even as a tape recorder.
What would a tape recorder pick up? Sounds?
Sounds, voices, footsteps. Sound is probably the most common physical manifestation of all of this.
How can a non-physical thing make a sound? Because don't we need to have a physical, move the airwaves with your...
Yeah, this has to do with electricity.
Okay. With electricity.
You can reproduce sound from a piece of celluloid that was encoded in a projector. There's really no real viable theory for how they do it. Some of it actually, some of the sound, some of the physical manifestations are not physical in the sense that they can be recorded on equipment. Somehow it's like they've come into your brain. Someone's gotten into your brain and created this experience for you.
Where no one else has heard it.
Where no one else has seen it or heard it. And there's no way to record something like that. But every now and then you can get physical knocks, footsteps, voices, and if there's movement of objects, you're not always lucky enough to get movement when the lights are on and when everybody's ready and set. You need to set something up all night, have the capability to film when the lights are off, that sort of thing.
I have a lot of questions, but I want to give the audience a chance. Anybody else have a question and want to ask Michael or Lori? Or anybody have any ghost stories they want to tell us? Anything happened to them? Okay, good. Wait till we get the mic over to you. This is great.
Hi. I'd like to know, I've been at Molly's and I've been down in the basement before, and when I was down there by myself, I had this really strange feeling like there was someone watching me. There was no one else there. What causes these ghosts, like people or haunted things, to come out? I mean, what brings them out to demonstrate pinching and talking or laughing? Is there anything that you can do to bring that out?
Sometimes I think it's just attention getting.
Yeah. I think, too, it's like we were saying before, they're often, usually not any more aware of you than you are of them. Certain people, Lori, for instance, is somebody who would be maybe a beacon to them, somebody who's can be seen, they are aware of this person because of their psychic energy. There are a lot of cases where there are two people in the room and one person will hear something or feel this sense and the other won't. It could be that you have a higher level of psychic energy or sensitivity than the average person, and that shows up like a light in a window or something to this person, and they want to come forward and get some attention.
Also, if you have young children in the household, when kids reach puberty, that for some reason is a very high energy draw to entities on the other side. So one of the first things I always ask when someone calls and asks about, gee, we're having this ghost, I'll always say, do you have kids at least 9 or above? And probably at least 8 times out of 10, there will be young kids in the household.
We're talking about poltergeist now?
Poltergeist, which by the way is from the German, and it means, I believe, noisy ghost, or just bothersome, troublesome ghost.
Are there different kinds of ghosts, like some we talked about just get kind of possessive. They don't want to leave. For instance, the John Palmer house, you've both been there. This ghost, Lotta, she is kind of ingrained there because she's so attached, it seems.
But she's encouraged to be there. I think that there's a love extended to her and acceptance, and they said they've been there 20, 25 years. So I think that, you know, that's obviously okay. I think it's also, as Michael stated, that when people are really very attached to earthly things, they can be attached to people, places. There's very little that can really dislodge them unless you have somebody come in and talk to them. And they can be talked to. I've done that.
Anybody else want to jump in here? Oh, okay. We'll stand up and we'll get the microphone over to you.
Would you care to comment on the fact that Harry Houdini, who is a world-famous magician, spent all his adult life investigating psychic experiences and spiritualism. And he didn't find one legitimate case, not one.
And I believe he also said he was going to come back.
Yeah.
Well, he spent a great deal of time debunking or attempting to debunk, which I don't have a problem with, because I think it certainly needs to be made as clear and as honest as possible. However, he did leave word with his wife before he left of a secret code word that I understand has been broken since. They had met for years and years on the anniversary of his death. Well, I read this a couple of years ago because it's always around Halloween. I don't know whether he died on Halloween or he was born on Halloween, but something about that anniversary date. And it's my understanding the code was broken.
That's a good point, though. Wasn't there a period in American history where spiritualism was kind of like the thing to do?
It was very high. It began with the Fox sisters back in the early 1800s. And they did table wrappings. And there's a lot of conjecture. A lot of people believe that they were just fakes, that 2 young girls that found it was a real attention-getting device. But I don't know. There's other fields of thought about that.
It was their version. I think it was their version of the movies. I mean, everyone wants something exciting to happen. I mean, what most parapsychologists do is sit in a little laboratory hour after hour after hour and do statistics. They run statistical analysis on card guessing and that sort of thing. And that's how could you make a movie about that?
No,
that's,
it's pretty
that's very
boring.
Yeah.
Well,
really.
You're grieving for your lost loved one, and you go into this room and you're given signs and you're given all of this demonstration, and it's just by the nature of this subject, it opens itself to a lot of fraudulent activities. And like Mr. Houdini was, if you set out with the definition kind of fixed in your mind that it must not be this, therefore there's a logical explanation for it, or it seems like he went out looking for fraud rather than going out open-minded and saying, well, this may be or this may not be. If you go out looking for fraud, you'll find it every time. And I would say he was probably right. I think most of what he investigated was probably fraud.
Is this a good point to maybe have a word of caution for such things as people that do take advantage of other people who are gullible? How about Ouija boards? You know, just trying to allow something in. Couldn't that be dangerous? Can we talk about that?
Well, of course it is. That, and plus just back on the track here about people who are fraudulent. You know, when we are suddenly bereaved, when we suddenly have the loss of someone, lots of times people will look to a psychic, to a medium, to someone who can proclaim, to, you know, communicate. And I think if you go out seeking that without good referral, without at least knowing who you're seeing, and especially if these people are charging exorbitant prices, run, do not walk to the nearest exit, and find another source.
Where do you get your referrals from?
Well, my best referral is word of mouth. I have a tremendous amount of people who've come to me over a number of years and keep coming back My secretary will attest
I guess
to
she
that.
want to stand up here?
Yeah, I was.
Stand up. There you go.
I was just going to say, we get a lot of phone calls from people who are skeptical, and because of the amount of money that is charged for regular personal readings, I always send them copies of like articles that Lori has been in, any kind of credibility statements from other clients, and that helps a lot.
Okay, that's good to mention. We don't like anybody to be taken, and to me, this is even more serious than being taken because I'm pretty open-minded, but it's something I wouldn't want to fool around with. In fact, we have a couple ladies here. If there'll be some good as to join us in this program, we want to talk about something called spirit attachment. I'll let you explain that first, and then maybe we'll see if we can get one or two of them to talk about that. I think one of them did go to you for that problem, right?
I'm trying to remember which one this is
Okay, I know who
now.
it was. Let's see if where is she? Oh, there you go. You want to stand up and tell us what happened to you?
Sure. What happened was I think I consulted with you on a couple of different things, but I moved into a house. It was an older farmhouse, and I didn't know who had lived there before, but a couple of different things happened. I really discounted them. I was moving boxes in, and this hat appeared, and then I found out it was Grandpa's hat. It was Grandpa's house that I bought from this family, and I didn't think anything of it. And I was moving boxes into a closet, and the next day I went back in that closet, and there was a wheelchair in there, and I could have swore that wheelchair wasn't there. It was his wheelchair. And I didn't think anything of it. Well, it wasn't until I started wanting to smoke that I really got thinking, okay, this is really strange. What is happening? And through some help with...
Why is that?
Because I don't smoke. But I had some help through a counselor going under hypnosis. I actually got to, I don't know, maybe it's the same thing that Michael mentioned, that maybe I was just sensitive to this, but I was able to see and feel this man who was stuck in my house, and he didn't know, he was looking for his family. There was no one there, and that's what kept coming to me was, where is everybody? I'm lost. And there was a light, and there was hands coming out of a light, and I told him to go, and I didn't have any reoccurrences after that.
Okay, now you did go to see Lori though about this problem, didn't you not? Did you not?
There
Or at
was
least talk to
another
her?
one that she had, but I can comment on this. This is why I wasn't quite too into it. What she was experiencing, of course, is she's a very psychic person. And it's sort of like Michael said, you know, on the other side, when someone who has this ability pretty pronounced, whether they recognize it or not, sort of like a radio station that goes out, gee, they start tuning into you. And, you
That's
know,
a good way to describe it.
well, it is, really. I think she just had a very strong psychic experience. But what I want to say is that it sounds scary. It sounds like maybe somebody was trying to possess her and get her to do things. And I don't believe that's possible unless you're not in a good mental state, unless you're somebody that's high on drugs or into alcohol or something where your spirit is lowered. It's not going to happen.
I'd like to make a quick comment on that. In fact, when you asked me about my experience, if I'd share it today on the show, I, in fact, told you, well, it wasn't a ghost, because I didn't think of it that way. It was someone who was lost, and I didn't feel threatened by him. I didn't see him. It wasn't anything like the Hollywood glorified movies. It was someone that was lost, and I felt it was a real person. And then when I did find out from the previous owners that, yes, it was, I mean, I knew his name and everything, so it's not something wicked and scary.
Okay, speaking of wicked and scary, remember the movie Poltergeist? I also read a few books by a couple, and they're called demonologists. Are there such things, or as far as you know, or your experience, as demons? Do we have bad spirits?
Yeah, I believe we do.
And are they just people that were bad as people?
No, I believe there's entities on other planes that have nothing to do with being of a human form at all. And I believe that for whatever reason, and we don't know, they come in and once in a while connect. Again, I believe that when a person's persona is not strong and grounded, if you've, lowered your resistance level, so to speak, I think it's very attractive to demonic kind of forces. Again, I don't think they're running over the earth plane, but I think that you can be open to it if you yourself are not balanced.
Well, we were talking about exorcisms before. What are they, and how do they get rid of these evil spirits?
I have never attended an exorcism. I have gone and spoken to unhappy spirits who have, in fact, I did one in my own house.
Well, tell us about that.
Oh, well, my own exorcism, one of the first things that they will always tell you, they being the experts, is that you're never supposed to confront the ghost. You're always supposed to gently just sort of acknowledge them. Well, my daughter was 10, prime age for this, And we knew we had this ghost when we moved into the house, and I had gone downstairs in the basement and talked to it prior, and I had told this ghost that I would leave him alone if he'd leave us alone. And we thought we had a great understanding. We had been there about 3 to 6 months, and I went to the store one afternoon, and I came home, and my daughter was in tears. She said, "Mom, the rocking chair was going crazy in the living room. The lights were going off and on in the kitchen." And I believed her. I believed it was true because I had heard the footsteps and the doors slamming downstairs, and like I said, we just sort of accepted him down there. Well, being a very, mother type, I went immediately downstairs. It was the middle of summer. The furnace was not on. So there could not have been anything coming from that would have created this noise, and I confronted this ghost. And I told him that if he wanted to take on somebody, he could jolly well take on me. And about that time, a bang, and I turned and looked at the furnace, and there was an indentation in the side of it. And I said, "That's fine." I said, "You just go ahead and keep it up, and I'll bring in the big guns." I didn't know what those were, but I would have brought in the big guns.
Anybody else have any experiences like that, or maybe not quite? Oh, you want to stand up, please? And
Yes, I came home one night and was ready. It was a cold day, and I was ready to take a bath and to warm up. And I was just laying back and relaxing, and all of a sudden, somebody grabbed my throat, and I couldn't see anything, and pushed me under the water. And it was, I had to twist and turn, push my way out of that bathtub, And it was, and then I left it, of course, and shut the door, and I went to bed. And it must have followed me because it shook my bed and everything. And I got just out of that place. I just moved in that place, and so I left that night, and I never went back.
Did you find the history of the place? Did you know?
No, it was just an apartment. I had just relocated, and I just moved in there. I wasn't there even a week, like 3 days, and
you hadn't been drinking?
No. I had just come. I had worked a swing shift. I was coming home on my motorcycle, and it had been a cold day, and all I want to do is warm up.
Have you ever had that happen to you again? Has that been the only
no,
time?
not that.
Could that have just been a very territorial ghost?
It happened, in a dream,
In a dream.
In a dream, it's like what you call like astral travel or what, being out of body.
So this was not in a waking state when you went in to take a bath?
This prior experience, this was physical. I couldn't understand. But in a similar, like when in a dream state, I was attacked almost like those black fuzzies in that movie Ghost,
Yeah.
and but the same experience, there you didn't figure you would feel anything physical, and yet it did happen, and I was stuck, but something else, some other entities or what came along and just got me out of it, But when I was in that apartment, I was just by myself and I had no help,
Well, I'd be curious to go back and want to find out if any other people have had problems there.
Yeah, I don't know.
You couldn't wait to get out. You didn't really want to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. Going back to Molly McGuire's, when we were there, you said you felt the presence of, I think, three?
Three.
What?
I felt the man downstairs, and I felt two women. And one woman that I felt was very small, oriental, very just unhappy with her station in life. I think she had to stay there and sort of oversee things. And the other woman I thought was tall, Caucasian, with rather reddish blonde, kind of strawberry blonde hair. And I believe this may be the one that the laughter has been heard from.
And also maybe calling Catherine's name.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Michael, you just got the impression of the man, or did you get any other?
No, actually, when we went up, and again, this is not my strong point, but when I looked at the sink, it was a bathroom where the walls had been removed, but the sink was still there. I got an immediate image of a woman, what looked like a floor-length dress, maybe brown, kind of a heavy color, heavy cloth dress, just standing in front of the sink. But that was it. That was very quick, and that was all I saw.
Ray, you want to stand up? Ray is the proprietor there. Has anything bad happened to anybody at Molly's?
Not that I'm aware of. Like you suggested earlier, it seems like a very warm, friendly place, but there there's been reports of the woman laughing and
Well, that's not bad.
and things of that nature. And
The pinching's not too bad either.
well, I guess not, but the lady doesn't work there anymore. I know that probably the only time I actually felt anything was down in the basement area around where the old Shanghai tunnel was closed up. It, just kind of an eerie feeling like the hair standing up on the back of your neck or this type of thing. And
It wouldn't just be that kind of basements are kind of icky anyway, and they give you that weird feeling. Is it?
I don't think so, because I had felt very comfortable in the basement. This was after I'd been down there a number of times and was very familiar with it.
People do talk about the Molly Maguires, though, don't they? You have.
Yeah, they do. There's longshoremen. Some of the older longshoremen come in. We're right across from the Longshoremen's Hall there, and they talk about actually seeing movement in the windows up on the floors on Molly's when Molly Maguire's was closed. And there was one lady called from California, all right, who used to work there, who talked about seeing something like that. And actually, her and her husband went up and checked out on the second two floors because there wasn't supposed to be anyone up there, and there wasn't when they went up.
Doesn't make you nervous or anything.
It doesn't make me nervous, no, and most people feel very comfortable there.
It's kind of colorful, though, to have your own couple of ghosts, isn't it?
Well, I'm intrigued. It's interesting. We had a roofer come in that did some roofing, and he came in on a Wednesday because it's the day it started raining, and they still had some of the roof open. And I wasn't there yet, but he heard the laugh, all right, as he was struggling with the mops and the buckets and this kind of thing to get up the stairway. And I guess it sounded definitely female, kind of a hollow sound to it, and so forth and what. But the first thing he said to me when I got there finally was, all right, Ray, what have you set up? All right, was his attitude.
Thought it was a joke?
Well, he thought it was, and this kind of thing. And then came down on a following Sunday. He needed to do some additional work because there was reports of a lot more rain. And again, the struggle going up the stairway, he heard it again. And I was in the building. I wasn't where he was going up the stairway, but I had walked over to the bar area, and he called me then and told me that it had happened again. And I really thought he was pulling my leg then.
You know now that he probably wasn't.
Well, I'm beginning to suspect that he probably wasn't. In fact, that day, the closest I came to actually having an experience was I was programming a number into our alarm system so that he could leave and I could leave and he could turn on the system when he left after he was done with his work. And as the door was closing in that area, I was walking away, and I was frustrated because I'd forgotten how to program it. I was going after instructions. And I heard what sounded like a laugh start, but by the time I walked back to the door and opened it, it was over. So I'm not sure how. I wasn't as clear about what it was as he was.
You'll just have to listen to the other people's stories. Thanks a lot. Now we have another question here. You want to stand up, please?
Well, I just wanted to know if you can record ghosts on film.
That's a controversial subject. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of supposed ghost photographs. I don't think anyone has really held up to close inspection. I don't know why. I think the actual, to me, the sound, for some reason sound seems to be the most common manifestation that can break through and actually be recorded. The seeing of a ghost, like when I saw what I saw, when she sees what she experiences, it's more of a mental picture. You need a lot of light and a lot of mechanical help to record any image on film, and these things are so faint that my hunch is that it'd be really hard to record one on film.
I was going to ask you about that. We're talking about ghosts moving things, making noises, talking. When you do see a ghost, what does a ghost look like? And does it always look the same to all the time, or does it look different? Is it stronger? When we went to John Palmer House, some people visually saw what they call Lada, the ghost that supposedly haunts that house. Have what have you said you can see sometimes, and what do you see? And when you
The
say you see
first
with your mind,
ghost,
or
well, the first ghost I ever visibly, saw was like 3D. It was actually out in the middle of South Dakota, the middle of farmland, no outside visible lights. I had woken up in the middle of the night. I was there with my husband and my baby, and I thought my baby was crying. I woke up and I was absolutely awake. Two men were standing next to the bed with a spotlight on them, and they were dressed just like cowboys. One was very short and one was very tall, and I couldn't see their faces. And I just screamed. It totally freaked me out. And my husband woke up, they disappeared just like that. And I was wide awake, and I knew what I had seen. And then several years later, I saw also another full-form ghost. Since then, and I find that a lot of times I've had those kind of experiences when I have been going through very emotional times, times when I've been, probably my energy has probably been a lot more psychically attuned. Since then, and that's been over 20 years ago that I saw the last one, I see them more almost as a negative. When you see the negative before it's developed, I see that outline and I see sort of the face, and I can see that very clearly. I have not seen a full 3D type ghost for some time, and I get a lot of impressions in my mind's eye that a lot of times get validated, like with Michael when I told him what I saw, and then he confirmed what he thought also.
And what have you seen, Michael?
Well, on the few occasions where I've actually feel that I've seen something, again, it's a mental picture. But everybody I've talked to and everything I've read, they seem to appear like they did in life, more or less solid. Oftentimes so solid that people don't realize that they're actually a ghost. I mean, people here may have seen what could be a ghost and thinking it was just a regular person.
Can they walk through walls?
They seem to be able to.
Someone told me some could and some couldn't.
It's hard to say. I always wondered.
But how does anybody know?
I always wondered why do they have clothes? How can a piece of clothing be passed from?
So they won't be shocking to you, for
right.
one thing. Well, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the one, the doctor, who travels the world giving lectures about life after death, and she's a bona fide, physician. Mm-hmm. And she tells the story that happened several years ago of a woman getting off the elevator in her office building. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross looks at this woman and thinks, I know her. The woman has a very waxy complexion, looks strange, not well, and this woman actually speaks to her, tells her her name, and says, I'm your patient that died however long ago, and I'm back here to confirm for you that there is life after death. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is so shocked. She says, will you come back to my office and sign your name on a piece of paper? And this woman did that. And she, of course, has written tons of books on life after death. If she ever comes to the Portland area, I strongly advise you go hear her lectures. They have forbidden her to speak as a physician on this. So the last time she was in Portland, she concluded her lecture and she said, those of you who need to leave at this point, you may. But now I'm going to talk about what really interests me, and it was the life after death.
Why do people have such a hard time believing in ghosts? I think most people are what we call religious or spiritual, and if you're religious, then you believe that there's a physical form and there's a spiritual form.
It's unknown. It's total unknown. I think people fear and probably reject anything they can't control and explain.
You know what, we only have a few minutes left. Oh, we have another question? Okay, let's wait.
I have a question about Ouija boards. A lot of younger people or anybody are into them. Well, I believe they're created from your energy, and if they're kind of dangerous, because you mentioned something about things like that you shouldn't really mess with, well, why do they sell them at Toys R Us?
Well, because it's like anything else. If it's interesting to the consumer, they're going to do it. I believe that Ouija boards are dangerous in the sense that they can be misused, just like anything in metaphysics can be misused. If we do indeed have entities out there that don't belong on this earth plane, and we have people with kind of high energy trying to play around with that, they could be very attracted to coming in and misusing it. And anything I've ever heard about Ouija boards has been negative. I've never found anybody having a positive experience, including myself when I tried it several years ago.
Another caution on spirits and fooling around. Two quick questions. My first question is, how many here, with a show of hands, actually think spirits are a possibility? Okay, and how many think absolutely not? You can't sell me. Okay, that's good. That's fine. Okay, and my last question, depending on how much time I have left, is we talked about homes that you walk into, like the house that you had being haunted and these things happening. I talked to a woman who said that she moved into this house and a man had been murdered there. She had this heavy feeling.
But she didn't know that. This
right.
was the one we
Tell
were
me a
talking
little bit about that and what the laws are now as far as revealing.
Okay, this lady bought the house 7 years ago, and at the time there was not the law about realtors revealing if something violent had happened there, if indeed somebody had a terrible disease in that house. Now it's the law. She'd been in the house about a year, had always felt a very, very unhappy, heavy feeling in the bedroom. I don't know this lady really well, but I know her well enough to have gone to the house, talked with her. I certainly feel she's a very balanced lady. She's an intelligent professional. This is not somebody who's off in wacko land. She called me, asked me to come out because she said that the gentleman who had lived there prior had been murdered in the bedroom, and his murder was unsolved. And I said, fine, I'll come out and talk to him. And I thought, how awful. This person is sitting around in the same bedroom where he died, trying to figure out, well, nobody is solving this, and probably hasn't even recognized he needs to move on. So she stayed in another portion of the house. I did what I use in, it's a Native American ceremony. I smudge, in other words, I use a sweetgrass and walk through and talk to the spirit. And maybe it was pre-suggestion, maybe it really happened, but I told her when I was done she would notice the difference and she would no longer have that feeling. And she called me about 2 hours later and she said it was totally gone. And I think that's the proof in the pudding. If it works, fine.
This show's been very interesting. We're going to have to get to the end now. We're just about, time's just about up. One quickie, just a 3-word answer. People do have to reveal now any secrets about houses, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so just check in case they don't tell you. Just make sure that everything's okay in the house before you get it. I want to thank you both, Michael, Lori, for being our guests. Really appreciate it. It's been a fun show. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I hope you all had a good time. And I'd like to thank the viewing audience, and we'll see you again on Parapsychology Today. Thank you for joining us. We'll have another great topic next time.